founder or an entrepreneur. You wanna take your company value to 300 million, we gon' show you how to do it. But we got the roadmap, the aspirations. We'll give you a game plan and strategies. Seize control of your company's destiny today by tuning in to Private Capital Mastery. Let's start the show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Private Capital Mastery podcast and community. I'm your host, Brian Franco, and thank you for joining us here today. Today is a very special episode. We're going to be talking about the entrepreneur's endgame. We're going to focus on the passion, the profit, and the happiness, which, let's face it, sometimes we overlook that. And profit does not always equal happiness, as we're going to learn today with our guest, Nick Layton. And Nick, thank you for being here. Thank you for spending the time here with us today. And
Brian, it's great to be here.
Yeah.
It's lovely meeting up with you.
We were just talking about how, a few years ago, we sat and we recorded upstairs in our building and talking more about,
the process of M&A, how to do it, where to start, what are you going to do to go through it successfully. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah. So, and we actually since then, we've closed on a transaction where we had a common client.
Yep.
And you helped them really navigate through the human emotions that come along with that, as we were navigating them through more of the process and the function of the transaction. But it was really good working with you on that deal.
That's fun. Let me talk about the beginning of that one.
Yeah, let's go.
Should we just jump into it?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
So this was an owner of an engineering company, and when I started coaching with them, they knew the end result. They knew they wanted to get out of the business in so many years.
Yes.
So that was part of what we were putting together when we were coaching. Now, I got to tell you, they didn't know that Meritage existed, so they didn't come to you first of all.
No.
They went to another M&A company, didn't work out, it was frustrating for the owner, and I actually sat down and had a conversation. I'm like, you're frustrated with this relationship, and what we're doing here has to be fun, so let's look at what some other options are.
Yes.
So actually, that's why this all happened, and the three of us know each other, is because someone else was trying to do it, but it wasn't fun. So with that instance, they knew why they wanted to get out, and they knew not they wanted to get out of business, but they knew where they wanted to get to next, which in this case was buying land and then building a second home in a foreign country.
Yes.
And that's what we try to understand. That's like the champagne moment. The champagne moment is that house is now finished. But what do I need to do to get there? I need to have certain revenue in a business so I can sell it. It's got to be a sellable business. And then I've got to have the time and the energy to go and build that house.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
So what made it not fun? What made it not fun for that particular client in that first part?
Now, I see this quite a lot. When companies are thinking about selling, they concentrate so much on that, getting that EBITDA right, getting it whatever it might be, and they lose the human element within their business.
Absolutely.
So there has to be an eye on selling, but there has to be an eye on the business continuing as well. Yes. And I don't know if you see this, but the process isn't quick, often selling a business.
No.
And in that time, the eye is just off the business a little bit. And people feel that. The people within the company feel that. The team feels that. And key people may leave. And clients feel that. And clients may leave.
Correct. Yeah, because when you think about, the public markets, companies are transacting every day, thousands and thousands and thousands of times a day, right? But the reality is that's able to occur because there's real-time data in those public companies, where privately held companies, specifically the ones that you and I work on, they are working on snapshots of data from a month ago, 3 months ago, a year ago. And so when you're trying to transact in an M&A or transaction or capital event, and you're working with data that's not always up to date, really, right?
Absolutely.
And even when it is up to date, when it comes to an M&A transaction, the measurements we're making are often different than what measurements in the business that the owners are making themselves. Right. And so this is sometimes foreign to them. Sometimes they understand it. Sometimes they just never understand it, but they do it.
Absolutely.
Because we tell them to, right? But, I love your focus as a coach to entrepreneurs, because you help them understand, by showing them, okay, and I think even when we met, you asked me what my champagne moment was, right? Yeah. Having the end in mind, and then reverse engineering it from there. And then once you have that roadmap, right, you take that turn by turn, you continue on that journey until you get to that intended destination. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest challenge? Because we all have that champagne moment. We all have imaginations to see ourselves whether it's a destination or or maybe it's a vacation or maybe whatever it may be, right? But what do you see as the challenge in terms of why do we get in our own way? Is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think we lose sight of where we want to be. So champagne moments are personal to you as an individual.
Okay.
So yeah, it could be building that second home in another country. I have people I'm working with right now who want to go to the opening of the Olympics. And they just book their tickets because it's coming up. Or they could be purchasing their first home. There's all kinds of things that it could be, but it's got to be personal to them. So now we link it to the business. The business is the power that allows us to get there. And I think people don't break that apart.
I see.
Like, I want to do something personally, this is my business, but they take the business in a personal manner. So the business is a mechanism.
Yes.
And that's why you're able to sell it. You're able to let go of it. Now, it's even harder if you start it in the first place. It's your baby.
Yes.
Right?
We say that all the time, and we hear that all the time.
Right. So they've run it how they've always wanted to. So the first step when people say to me, I'm thinking I might want to exit, I'm like, well, do you even have business data? Do you have the accounts that are third party audited that are going to give someone the right information? And normally they don't. And then when they push it into that format, they're like, oh, well, that doesn't look like something that's sellable. I'm like, on paper it isn't yet. You're right. You're totally right, because you've been measuring the success of your own business in a different way.
That's exactly it, right? And so we talked about that just a moment ago, and you were saying how, with that common client that we had, it wasn't fun for them the first time around, because I think, you could speak to this because you were there, but there's data, materials, and information that needs to be available. And if you don't have it, it's not fun to go back into your business and try and extract these KPIs.
Say it all the time.
And so when you look at a business with the end in mind, with that champagne moment, you're saying, okay, I imagine you're assessing where they are today. You're identifying what their expectations are. The expectations usually come from that personal experience, that champagne moment.
Right.
And then you're building that strategy, but and bringing in professionals along the way to help prepare them for that transaction. But I see it time and time again where businesses are volatile, yes. There's seasonality, there's changes, it's an organic being in itself.
Right.
But we find the entrepreneur, the human emotion is very volatile, more volatile than any market, right? But how do you keep them focused? I mean, because that champagne moment, as you call it, it's exciting, it's inspiring, but how do you keep them accountable to that along the way?
Okay, no, great question. So accountability is a big deal.
Yes.
I mean, working with a business owner. And so part of it is being friendly, but also having that hard edge of accountability.
Like hard love, tough love.
Right. Yeah. So a typical coaching session, we'll go in hard. Okay, show me the numbers. Show me the real data. I feel like sales are kind of okay this quarter. But okay, just look at the numbers, okay?
Yeah.
And then you've got people who are going to freak out. The sales aren't there, or overconfident they may be there. Like, okay, let's go down to the next level. Let's look at your marketing data. Let's see where that is. Do we have enough prospects coming in, whatever that might be, however that looks?
Yes.
Okay, so okay, now we're doing this. This is good. Okay, so now let's look at the people in your team. How are they doing? Oh, I think morale's fantastic. I'm like, well, that's not what I heard. So hang on, is there any data behind that now?
Yes.
Okay, so, and that's a typical first things we'll start. Then there's always opportunities and challenges that are going on in that business at that moment. Okay, once we've gone through all that, then my question is going to be, so what about you? Are you enjoying this? What's going on personally? Are you going on vacation? Are you working too hard? Do you have enough time to look after that sick parent? Whatever it might be. Did you get to the kids' soccer game? Whatever that is. That is part of the coaching. It's part of the human element.
You open my eyes personally right now, because you can't change the volatility of the human emotion, but you're focusing in and around what's influencing that human emotion. What are those external impactors that are steering them off course, perhaps, right? And then the same thing, there's going to be those same impact steering them back on course. Right. And that's that accountability that you provide them.
Right. So think of just one employee in your business, one individual, and they're not performing. So why are they not performing? They maybe don't have the processes or the motivation, or they're not being held accountable. Yeah, those three things you need in business.
You do.
But it could just be that their parent is sick, or their spouse is going through something. Or there could be things outside of business. Same for a business owner. So I'll have business owners who say to me, business is here, but I actually need an extra 3 hours a day to look after something personal. Like, okay, that makes sense to me. I've had someone who's, we've been coaching, he's like, I'm going for an exit. We were building to an exit. He called me up one day, said, plans have changed. My wife has a disease she may not get over. We're changing the hours. Now, she got over it. And he went through an exit. That's great. But plans do change.
Yeah, they do. And that's one thing we should plan for, right?
Right? Plan for change.
Yeah, plan for change. But, you know, so I could certainly see and have experience with clients as well, you know, the pain associated with not planning.
Yep.
Right? And but in that planning, you know, and understanding how you're working with the entrepreneur, because every case study you work on is different, you know.
Yes.
You know, even if it was the same industry, the founder's different, the owner's different, therefore the culture is different, right? And so what do you see, what's the common denominator, the common element that you see in an entrepreneur that is leading an organization with a solid culture, with people that are participating, even when we as human beings have a bad day, how do they show up as their best? I mean, what are some of those common traits that you see?
Okay, so let's talk about the trait of a business owner, entrepreneurial business owner. Okay, so you can do all kinds of assessments. Doesn't matter what assessment you're into, it's going to work the way. I use one called DISC, which thousands of people use, but there's multiple. Ultimately, entrepreneur is someone who is driven and has influence.
Yes.
Now, they probably don't follow rules. That may be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yes.
If I actually start with a new client, I'll jokingly ask them in the first session that we're having, when was the last time you broke the law? Chances are they have a story there, right? Okay.
I like that.
You know, rules are guidelines.
Yeah.
They're suggestions,
Yes.
but that's how you get ahead. That's how you do something differently.
Correct.
Okay. But now, as the company grows, we actually need some of those rules for our own business.
Precisely.
So a company can get to a certain size, you can have an owner and you can have a general manager or someone running day to day who can be far more methodical, can put in systems and then can grow a team around that. Because that's how you grow a business. That's how you create something that can be sold.
Yeah.
Other ways, the problem you always have when you're trying to sell a business is, well, the owner goes, is the business still there?
Is it intact? Yeah. Are they the glue that keeps that business together?
Exactly.
And if the answer is yes, we typically have to cure that with unfavorable deal terms.
Yep.
If the answer is no,
Right.
and one of the questions we ask is, you know, what would happen, you know, in our initial assessment, what would happen, we'd ask the entrepreneur, if you left right now after this meeting and did not show up for 3 months, no communication, no emails, no phone calls, what would happen? And there's, you know, we give them a multiple choice response, but most of them are, the business would survive, but it would be impacted, heavily impacted, right? And so we want to work them out of that situation. And specifically, we want to show them that they need to work themselves out of a job, not work in the business, but work on the business, as we say.
That's right, on the business, in the business.
But you know, we're not coaches. We're not. I mean, we're more referees, right? We'll call timeout. We'll say foul. You're doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. You know, we could certainly tell them, you know, what they're doing right, but because we're not going to call foul. But we're not going to tell them how to play the game. Where you as a coach are in the game with them. You're teaching them play by play. You sprinkle that accountability on them. And you keep that roadmap tight because you've already determined what that end in mind is. But here's something interesting to me. What happens when there's 5 owners and there's 5 champagne moments? How do you collaborate?
My goodness. And let's add an extra element on that if they're related in some way.
Okay,
Then it's mayhem. Then it's complete mayhem. Family businesses are just like that.
It sounds like a beginning of a good joke, right?
It very does. So that's when we sit down right at the very beginning. We're like, why are we in business together? So those different personalities probably have different advantages to them. So if they can all be cohesive, that's awesome. But inevitably, they don't have the same end game. They don't have the same champagne moment, and that's fine. I mean,
it is. It's fine, yeah.
But inevitably, there are human emotions. If it's a family business, it's definitely human emotions.
Yes.
Or if they've all worked, often I'll find there are owners, 4, 5, 6 owners, because it's been set up with an employee ownership scheme. Because there was a senior person at one stage, and now they've been purchased out.
Yes.
Okay, so you get that situation. it's one of the hardest. Can they actually sit down and can we all agree that we want to sell the business? What that final price is going to be? It's different for everyone.
Yeah.
That's awful.
So you find that common denominator, it sounds like.
If you can.
If you can.
Yeah. And I've sat in many meetings trying to negotiate them for each other. What would everyone be happy with?
Yeah.
Because if they can all come to you as a collective and say, okay, here's our range, here's how long they can agree on some of those common things, then it's a sellable business. If they can't, then it isn't a sellable business, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's not transferable.
Right.
Therefore, the value is going to be less for that, right?
Right. Now, I don't think I ever shared with you one of the best deals that I ever did. So, as a serial entrepreneur, I've sold businesses, and one of the businesses I sold was a strategic purchase for the other people. So, I owned a marketing agency in the Middle East.
Okay.
Another agency wanted to expand into the Middle East.
Yes.
So, they purchased my team, my client base, and my offices.
Okay.
But they never purchased me or my brand.
Yeah.
They didn't need my brand because they were coming in with an established brand.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation with them in the 11th hour of the negotiation. I'm like, what are you going to call this agency? And they're like, Nick, we don't need your brand because we have a brand. We're going to change the name on that door day one. I'm like, that's great, that's cool.
Okay.
So I said, I won't even sell you my brand. They're like, that's cool. They came in and I said, oh, by the way, Nick, we'd like you to leave this country and never come back for the next 2 years because we got this handle. We're going to fly in the general manager who's going to take it over with your team. I'm like, that's awesome. See ya, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
That's how I got into Southern California.
Yeah.
So left that, came to Southern California, like this is great. People kept calling me like, hey Nick, can we do some work? I'm like, nope, sold the agency.
Yeah.
Go to these guys.
Correct.
One day a guy came back to me, he's like, Nick, they're not here anymore.
Wow.
I'm like, really?
Wow.
Didn't work out for them because they didn't put these checks and balances in of the knowledge of the owner.
Yes.
They just thought they could come and do it.
Yeah.
So yes, they purchased some clients and some revenue, but you know what I did the next day I heard that? Because I didn't sell them my brand, I turned my website back on.
Yeah.
I still own that agency today.
And you have the right to, yeah.
I own that agency today, and it's operational and doing fantastic things.
Yeah.
So you could sell it and have a second bite of the apple. That's not bad.
Yeah. In most deals like this, there's a 2 to 5 year covenant not to compete,
absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
that's fine. We see some clients go back into the same industry that they were in, but with an advanced, more evolved mindset, right? And specific focus or direction.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, that's, we've actually been in situations in the healthcare markets where, we've sold the same client, sold 3 different companies that he started and sold and started and sold and started and sold, right? All outside of his covenant not to compete. So he did everything as he should have.
Absolutely.
When you talked about rules, right? He followed those rules. But he also utilized those rules to prepare, right? Because a 2-year covenant not to compete, for some people they say, well, I can't be in that industry for 2 years. That doesn't mean you can't be planning.
Right. Oh, yes. And a different perspective. Being able sitting back and not being able to sell, not being able to do certain things is great.
Yes.
So good.
But this also speaks to the importance that a founder and an owner has on a company because their DNA, is in that business from a cultural standpoint, right? You develop the employees, you develop the leaders, you develop even the customers, right? And the experience that customer had working with your agency, and that wasn't replicated. It sounds like,
and it should have been because the agency who purchased us, they were very similar, very very similar.
Yeah.
But for some reason it didn't transfer, and great for me, not so great for them. But that's what someone who is looking to sell should consider, and someone who's looking to purchase should also think about, right?
That's right, both ways, absolutely. Yeah, and this is why it's important to us to understand, can they leave for 3 months, or not? And if they can't, we have to identify what could go wrong, and then we backfill and correct those things. It's more of a do it with you model that we approach, but the work has to be done by the entrepreneur at the end of the day.
Yes.
And if they don't, right, it's going to reveal itself at some point in the transaction cycle or even post-transaction in a situation like you described.
Yeah, right.
So how do you prepare your clients that you're coaching, to be ready for this moment? Like, not just the exit in the physical, emotional, and sometimes mental separation when they sell the company, but there are some companies that you just can't sell without some sort of transitional period.
Right. Absolutely.
In retrospect, the group that acquired you probably should have listened to your advice to them. You fair warning. You gave them fair warning.
Yeah, I was happy to get out, and most people are. But yet, absolutely, there should be a transition period. So my first question to an owner who's going to sell is, let's say we do this transaction, a transaction.
Okay.
You're selling, and you have this transition period.
Yeah.
If they come to you, the new owners, and say, you have to work from 9 to 5 days a week, how will you feel? Mm-hmm. Because there has been no control up until now.
Yeah.
You've worked when you want it, how you want it.
Yes.
What if they say to you, you can't expense the things that I know you expense, your car, etc., etc.?
Correct.
What if they
Lifestyle.
say, actually, we would like you to run the business this way, and by the way, you have no hiring decision making anymore?
Yeah.
Basic questions. And if that's not going to fly with you because you're not that kind of a person,
Yeah.
then
That's
let's
going to
put
be a
that on the
problem.
table.
Yeah,
Right?
that's foreshadowing of what could happen, and if they're going to be. What I always say is, if a client is coachable, we're going to be fine. Mm-hmm. If they're not coachable, right, it's every turn can be abrasive.
Yeah.
Right? And that's not fun for them. Mm-hmm. It's not fun for any of us as advisors. It's not even fun for the investor, right? So how do you make this fun, right? How do you when you're thinking about the subject that we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. How do you take their passion, and that passion doesn't have to be for profit or happiness. It could be evenly balanced, right?
Sure.
But do you identify that with your clients and help them understand that,
Right. So one of the, I think, important human elements when brokering any kind of deal or working with people in your own team is trust.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
So are you going to trust the people who are purchasing you? It's not just a deal. It can't be just a deal. It's part of your life. It's part
That's
of
right.
what you've built.
That's
so
right.
do you trust them? So if they do turn around and say, you're going to be working 9 to 5 days a week, and actually you have 10 days of vacation, do you trust them that's a good enough decision? Or are we going to get petty over this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because the reality is, with that sort of rigid transitional format, that might be something that they haven't done since day one as an entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
They've never, perhaps they came at 6 to 2 or 6 to 5 or
Yep.
some days 6 to 6, right? But the reality is, those can be perceived as, handcuffs, right? Or golden handcuffs, as they call it. But the beauty there is you and I both know you could address those what would be a term of a deal before the deal ever occurs by working that client out of a job as much as possible, right? And as I said earlier, what isn't completed in terms of working themselves out of a job, we can still cure that with deal terms, which are ultimately accountability mechanisms embedded into the definitive agreements, but they're there in design to keep that business, or the continuity of that business there.
Right.
Because if not, then you find that the business is deteriorating, the investors are not happy. Why? Because they're not receiving the ROI that they intended. And that could be a negative impact even for the selling group, because at times, as you're aware, there are these contingent payments that can and should be paid, so as long as X, Y, and Z happen, right?
Yes.
So, and it's an accountability mechanism at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And that's where your expertise comes in, because someone who goes through a sale probably hasn't done it before.
No,
And so
typically not. Typically not.
Right. And so they don't know what they're missing. They don't know what's not there. They don't know what they don't know. So if there's trust between the buying and selling party and there's open communication, everything can be dealt with. Right? And that's where you're there to say, okay, well, it looks like this person, is going to be a bit of a loose cannon when it comes to taking vacation days. Right? And you're like, but as long as we hit these metrics, is that okay? And as long as that communication is there, cool.
Yeah, we've seen deals where a company, speaking about vacation days or PTO, the client had, let's say, I think it was 12 or 14 PTO days a year, and the acquiring party had unlimited PTO. Right? And so the seller's concern was, well, gosh, I've never given my employees that. What happens? Are they just not going to show up? And then I have this contingent payment to me, but if no one's showing up because you're letting them take as much vacation, what happens? And it was interesting to get the response from the acquiring party, and they told our client, the target, they said, look, we've looked at the stats, we looked at the data, and the unlimited PTO has created a culture here where people are still working on vacation. Right? And the way they factor in PTO was interesting. I can't remember exact calculation, but it was something to the effect of, even if they responded to one email, they were still working. Right?
Yeah, and it'd be the most important email of the day, probably.
Correct. Yeah. So that unlimited PTO was it was not a concern. And even post-transaction, it really helped the culture of the business.
Yeah.
You know, unrelated to PTO, we were working on a case study where they serviced. There's 12 states that have no fault insurance if you're in an auto injury, right? And so Michigan was one of those states that had unlimited coverage, where New Jersey, New York, and Florida they had a cap, right? And when you look at when you research that data, you'll find that New Jersey, as an example, the personal injury cap became the target. Michigan, no cap.
Right.
I
see that.
And the average claim was lower than the states that had a cap.
Interesting.
So you kind of tie that into the PTO, right? It seems concerning, but when you see the data play out and you see what it means and the results, it's very, I'm not say shocking, but it's very surprising. But it was also, from a logical standpoint, it made sense.
Yeah, right, totally.
It made a lot of sense.
Right, and that's what's so exciting about business today is there's so much more data available to us.
Yes.
How we use that in our business.
Yes.
And that should be revolutionizing what we can do in a business and therefore make us more sellable.
And we say collapse time, right?
Yeah.
It allows the entrepreneur to collapse time for themselves, to leverage technology and implement it into their operation so that they can work themselves out of a job or bring in and train folks that can, replace them.
Absolutely.
Not all, maybe in part, right? Because you typically find with entrepreneurs, as you described, I mean, they are driven. They I don't say they don't follow rules, but to your point, they don't like rules, or they figure out a way to navigate through life where you utilize the rules, but you hack the system in a way that you're utilizing them to your advantage, right? Not by breaking the law,
no, sure.
but by navigating through those rules that push it to the edge, and then. But to then take that same personality, right, and sell it to a larger entity, it's a change. Right. And what we typically find with the work that we do up front with our clients is that's a welcome change, because I always share with my clients early on is that, look, are we selling the company? Yes. Is there going to be a liquidity event? Absolutely, right? Could there be more than one liquidity event in times? Yes. But I think the big driver, and I don't want to call it the champagne moment, it leads to the champagne moment, but what we remind them is you're selling the things you no longer want to do in your company, right? And to your experience as well, when you sell to a strategic, there are things that could occur, the better together model, right?
Yeah.
And so, but they haven't experienced that because they haven't gone through that transaction or that transition, right? And so, but once they do, it all comes to fruition and they see it in real time.
Yep.
And what took, months now took days or weeks. What they wanted to do in terms of accessing new geographies didn't take the heavy lift that it would have taken if they were exclusively running their business on their own, because the strategic party already had a geographic reach in that area or that territory. Now they could bring their service discipline or product into that territory, which is there again. I mean, you would have to start over again 20 times if you want to be in 20 different areas, right? Now, some business owners have figured out ways to do this, and that's great, but ultimately, that means they're able to replicate their model, which means they're working on the business, not in the business, and that's the biggest difference that I see.
Yeah, and they're 10 timesing their business. They're not just iteratively getting larger or bigger or more profitable. And that's not sustainable, let's face it.
It's true.
So you've got to be working on your business to find those ways of doing it. And going back to the data model, I think what I see traditionally, business owners have this innate knowledge and experience, which is great. They have the right connections, they know the stuff. But now if you can leverage large language models, AI, generative AI, whatever those new tools might be, and you can give that knowledge to people in your organization, you're transferring that. It's transferable now. And let's say the owner per hour is $500 and you can hire someone at $25 an hour and they can essentially do the work because they have that knowledge at their fingertips. That technology is going to cost you some money. That's no problem though. Because now you're making something which can be 10x'd and something that can be transferred to a new owner. Powerful stuff.
It is powerful stuff, and that's the mindset you help entrepreneurs get to, right?
Yep.
I mean, because let's face it. I mean, we all fantasize about that that environment that we could create where you could 10x yourself or your 10x your business, right? But to really put that into play it takes this very special type of experience, wisdom, which you have. So those tuning in and listening in, how do they reach out to you if they're looking for a coach or if they're looking for a mentor to help them navigate through and prepare for this intended M&A transaction or champagne moment, whatever it may be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest thing is the book that I wrote is called Exactly Where You Want to Be. Best-selling book. You find it on Amazon or bookshops.
Okay.
You can also go to exactlywhereyouwantobe.com. You can find me there. Find me on LinkedIn under Nick Layton. Easy to do.
Yeah.
So easy to contact.
Okay. Well, I encourage everyone to reach out to you. I mean, I've met you several years ago. Yeah. We spent some time together personally, and then also, with the common client that we had, who's now retired. Living the life, living the dream. Yeah. Built that home overseas, and is just he's exactly where he wanted to be.
There you go.
Thanks to you, and in our joint efforts together on that. I really look forward to working with you again in the future and with future common clients. I'm glad you were able to come on the podcast because we really want to be able to provoke this thought in founders and entrepreneurs and help them understand what's possible. Yeah. Because there's some messaging out there that entrepreneurship is just you're tying yourself and it's painful. It is, but it's also very rewarding, right? And the fruit that can come out of, let's say, an M&A transaction or some sort of capital event, equates to generational wealth.
It's life-changing.
Yeah. It's life-changing, and that's why we do this, right? And it's like, I will have to admit though, at closing tables, there used to be champagne toasts and that champagne moment, but nowadays it's done virtually, and you give virtual high fives.
We might have to change that for the future.
We're gonna have to change that. We're gonna have to do something.
Yep.
Tell me what you come up with, because we need to implement that immediately.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Well, Nick, thanks for being here. Thanks for spending the time together, and look forward to having you back on.
Great. Thanks, Brian. It's been so much fun.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Private Capital Mastery Podcast and Community. I encourage you to reach out to Nick, learn more about what he has to offer you in your business, meeting you where you are on your journey, because it's all different. And I'm telling you, the impact that Nick had on the transaction that we worked on together was absolutely amazing. It really helped us move that transaction through. And today, even the acquiring party is still doing very well with that business, which is a big win for everyone involved. But I want to thank you for joining this episode. I'm your host, Brian Franco, and I'll see you next week.